Hi there, and welcome to MiWeek. I'm Christy McDonald. Thanks so much for joining us. It has been a week of keeping up with headlines, changes, and executive orders coming from the White House and President Trump. Many of the major initiatives he is tackling the first week on the job impact Michigan. So coming up on the show, we will look specifically at new immigration policies, concerns over program suspensions at the EPA and what that may mean for Flint. Also, some infrastructure projects getting some D.C. attention like the Soo Locks, and what leaders of the big three automakers plan to do after meeting with the president this week. Also coming up for you, we'll look into the report from the State School Reform Office on schools that face shutdown and a progress check on our regional economy. It is all coming up for you on MiWeek. But let's start with President Trump's first week on the job and many of the big changes that affect us here. You know our contributors, Nolan Finley of the Detroit News, Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press. Hey guys, how are you?
We're good.
You know, it's funny, as I sat down and I was writing the intro of the show about, it's been a week basically of keeping up. I was also reading something, and it was an article in the Washington Post that said, feels like we've been drinking out of a fire hose this week, you know, in terms of all the headlines and all the various things that have happening. So before we dive into some of the specific changes, I think that especially here in Michigan that we're watching what President Trump is doing in D.C. I'm going to start with you, Stephen, first, and I want you to kind of give me what your overall impressions have been of the first week here of the Trump administration.
Well, it's definitely a thumbs down on substance.
All right, Siskel and Ebert.
Yeah, well, it's just not, I don't think there's any surprise there. I wasn't a fan of the things he said he was going to do during the campaign. I'm not a fan of the way they look once.
Are you surprised at the speed of some of the things that he had
no,
talked
I
about
think
that he's doing right now?
I actually think that's his style, is to come in and sort of blitz a lot of things and try to make an impression and keep his promises early. I guess if you are someone who thinks thinks better of politicians who keep their promises, maybe you're inclined to think this is a good thing. He's doing it, and he's doing it quickly. But as policy matters, these are deeply problematic things. Some of them, I think, transgress pretty fundamental American principles. They take us back to times when not everybody was treated the same or looked at as the same here in this country, and I think that's really scary for people.
All right, Nolan, go ahead and give me what your impression is.
I think it was schizophrenic week. I think there was, there were some moments where I was saying, yeah, that's great, and others when I was, what are you thinking?
What were the specific moments where you said, yeah, great, and then?
And I think the highlights of the week, particularly for Michigan, you had the automakers certainly were pleased with their conversations with him and felt buoyed and felt like we're going to see an economic surge in the country, and that's good. I was surprised that, I would say the big winner of the week was labor. They walked in the Oval Office on the first day of a Republican presidency and walked out with most of their agenda. I mean, they got him to suspend the TPP, the Pacific Trade Agreement, and promised to reopen NAFTA. And not only that, they got him to twist the arms of corporate America to say, we want you to keep your jobs and factories here. What more could labor have asked for on day one? And
so let's go ahead.
That's more than they could have got from a Democrat.
Let's go ahead and take a look at the significance of that, of having the big three sitting there at the White House on Tuesday of this first week.
No, I think that was important. I thought their response to it suggested that they got a lot of the things that they wanted to hear. I mean, the truth is that the auto industry has been doing quite well. In fact, set a record again last year with 17.5 million.
Yeah, the profit sharing checks they just announced on Thursday for Ford and Fiat Chrysler were good.
Yeah, so this is not an industry that needs Donald Trump to do one thing or another. The truth is that it's a cyclical industry. It still has some baked-in problems with the manufacture of small cars. Where is that going to happen? How can you do that at a profit? Donald Trump is not addressing those things. What he's saying is, I'll get the economy going so people buy more cars. But they're already at 17.5 million units, and nobody expects it.
The companies do have to make the shareholders happy here, Nolan.
Well, yeah, but he actually, the things he's talking about is aimed at making production of small cars more profitable. If you reduce the regulatory and tax burden, then perhaps you can build small cars.
Maybe.
Right now, it doesn't make sense. But where they need his help most is they're heading towards 2025, and some really harsh environmental and mileage regulations kicked in. They were promised a midterm review in 2018. Obama killed that on his way out the door. They cannot continue this profit string and this sales string. If they hit 2025 and they're forced to make a fleet of cars, nobody's buying right now.
Well,
so they're
people
talking
are,
about
that's
they're,
not
hang on,
true.
they're talking about renegotiating NAFTA, but there's been some concerns that that's going to do some more damage to our economy than it's going to
Yeah,
do
maybe.
good.
But hold on a second. The industry is not complaining about gas mileage, and nor are consumers. I mean, people are buying cars that get better and better gas mileage, and the industry is going along. And the industry believes, if you talk to them internally, the engineers know that the fuel-based car is sort of on its last leg. That's the thing that's holding everything back from development in the industry. So that's just, I mean, that's just not true.
That's just wrong, Steve. I mean, and
Talk to the people who cover the auto industry.
I cover the auto industry. We wrote that during the auto show, and I wrote it. There's no way with the current fleet makeup that they can hit those numbers by 2025, and
With the current fleet makeup.
And the market for those hybrid and electric cars is not there. It's under 3% of the market,
developing.
and it has not developed. It's gone down over the last few years. People aren't buying those cars, and they won't buy those
From an
cars
engineering,
as long as
but
gas
you're not hearing what I
prices
said.
are cheap.
From an engineering perspective, anyone in the auto industry will tell you that the combustion engine is what is holding them back from the development that they all know is coming. And so the trick is to figure out how to make an alternative fuel source work. And consumers,
But they're not going to be there by 2025, and they
Maybe,
have no
I don't
confidence
know,
they can.
but there's no reason
the
to-
mandates
to-
are well ahead of
there's
both
no reason to
technology and of market demand. People are not buying these cars.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about and bringing that back towards when they were talking to the automakers about building the plants here in Michigan and maybe easing off some of the regulations in terms of environmental regulations as well. And that gets us to kind of talking about what's happening at the EPA in freezing reports that are coming out and also freezing press releases as well out to the public. Everything has to go through political appointees before the information is coming out. How concerning is that for people, Nolan? And especially as we do connect that to if you start freezing programs as well, what does that mean for some of the help for farmers?
That's two different issues. I think the freezing of information is absolutely inappropriate, and I think that was lifted today or late yesterday. But the EPA is clearly in a target, and not a bad target. It has been a rogue agency. It has been an agency that has operated, I think, extra constitutionally over these last several years.
How so?
Well, implementing sweeping changes to our economy and way of life while not going through our elected representatives. We're not a country that should be putting in place major policies through the rulemaking process. We have a lawmaking process to do that, and we've bypassed this, and I think you're going to come back to some balance here with the EPA.
The courts have actually said the opposite about that.
Sometimes not.
Republicans have been pushing that line for a long time, that the EPA is out of line. Most of the things that have been done over the last 8 years have passed court muster. They are not extra constitutional. Now, whether they're good or bad policy is another subject. And, I mean, I think it's really important to put this in the context of the things that are going on in this country. The pollution that we deal with, the pollution of the water supply in Flint. All of these things have to do with regulation. Now, you can argue that regulation is too heavy and that somehow business is suffering as a consequence, but you can also argue that the lack of enforcement of regulation is what's causing things like Flint, is what's causing things like sinkholes in Macomb County that swallow up people's houses. So you've got to have a balance. I mean, you've always had to have some balance between allowing business to do the things that it needs to do to make money and protecting people from the dangers.
So what about that argument, Nolan, that that the EPA should have been more invested in what was happening in Flint, and it was perhaps the fact that they didn't step in enough or regulate enough that
Flint
happened.
was incompetence. It wasn't an absence of a regulatory regime. You've got plenty of regulators there. What you had was incompetent bureaucrats caused the Flint problem. I don't know how you guard against incompetence through the regulatory process, and the EPA has been repeatedly rebuffed by the courts, most recently the Clean Power Plan, which was ruled unconstitutional or outside the law. Congress has a law in place that says if a rule has a certain amount of economic impact, it's got to be approved by Congress, and we have repeatedly ignored that at the EPA and putting in place these rules. It's got to be brought under control.
But again, tell that to someone in Flint. Would you sit across from someone
Again-
who's drinking poison water
again,
and tell them, hey, you know
you could
what?
have had-
The EPA is out of control.
You could have had a whole nother 70,000 pages of regulations for Flint, and it wouldn't have prevented an incompetent bureaucrat from making a poor decision.
Let's be clear about incompetent bureaucrats. It was an emergency manager who reports to the governor who made these decisions and should have been stopped by the EPA.
He's a bureaucrat, and so were the people who
How is he a
decided.
bureaucrat?
So were the people.
He's not a bureaucrat.
So were the people who said, "We're not going to put this water treatment, this corrosive treatment, in the pipes."
I think when it got to the point, though, that the DEQ recognized that and the EPA knew about it and then took months to decide exactly how they were going to tackle
idea
the
that
Corruption and incompetence at work, and no amount of regulation.
The idea that regulation is out of control will be hard to sell to people who are suffering because of environmental violations by industry and government.
Tell them how much more regulation would have prevented that.
All right, let's talk about, let's move on to something else, immigration. And also the fact that President Trump said, yes, we're going to start building the wall, we're going to start building it now, and taxpayers will be paying for it. We're going to get something back from Mexico eventually. And so when you look at the cost that the people are talking about, that could be somewhere $12 billion. How difficult, Nolan, is that to kind of sell to the public? Though his supporters, yes, that was one of the things that they really liked hearing from Donald Trump was, yes, he was going to build this wall. Is that the most effective use of $12 billion taxpayer money in terms of other spending, when other people say, gosh, maybe we could spend a couple billion someplace else?
Of course not. And I think, moving on this without fully studying whether it's going to be effective or not is one of the flaws you're going to see from this administration. He just plunges headlong, into fulfilling these campaign promises. He could have satisfied his supporters with a more by studying this and coming up with a more effective plan to secure the borders. People want the borders secure. Every other, the United States has the same right of every other nation to maintain its borders and control its borders. But there are other ways to do it, I believe, that would be a lot cheaper and a lot more effective. We've had fences, we've had walls, and people still get past them. People are not going to be stopped by, how big is this wall? Long as
20 feet or something.
No, it's not the full border. It's
it can't be.
It can't be. So they're going to find ways around. You've got to get a comprehensive immigration policy in place, and we've been unable to do that for the past decade, 15 years. And so neglect of that kind invites extreme response. That's the risk you run.
Okay, so it's a multi-pronged approach, and he has said that as well. From some of the things that you're starting to hear about his immigration policies or his ideas, what are you thinking?
Well, I mean, so this is all symbolism, right? He knows that a wall won't work. He knows also that the Mexican government will not pay for the wall, but he's using this as a way to stoke fears about people from other countries coming here and sort of cutting in line in front of either legal immigrants or other American citizens. And this is about jingoism and nativism as much as it is about trade or immigration. It is about telling people that somebody else is coming here and taking from you the things that you need or the promise that you think you're entitled to, and it's scapegoating. And so there are a lot of people, his supporters in particular, who are whooping about this because this is a response to their nativist fears. And there's something quite shameful about that, of course, from a moral standpoint. The policy implications also are awful. This also gets to the big fear of the Republican support for Trump, which is that he'll do something that starts a trade war. Starting a trade war with Mexico, which this could help incite, would damage everybody's economic fortunes.
Or with any country. Trade wars are wrong. But I think it goes beyond the things you cited. We've sat here for 10, 20 years, 25 years without an immigration policy and allowed 12 million people to come into this country illegally. That rubs people the wrong way for a lot of reasons, primarily because they have a respect for the law. And people in this country have always supported legal immigration, and we need legal immigrants. We need a lot more immigrants from a lot more places, bringing skills and the desire to contribute to society and work hard. We need a lot fewer illegal immigrants, and I think we've got to try to find a balance.
So what do you do? A wall doesn't deal with the people who are here. You can't send 12 million people home without spending more than $12 billion.
But you can't
so
let
then what do
another
you
12
do?
million in.
But
so
there aren't
you
another
have to
12 million
have-
coming.
We don't know.
Well, we do know. We
have
don't know
to-
that border crossings are down, and they have been going down steadily for a long
But
period
we
of
can
time.
sit here and depend on the fact, well, maybe people won't want to come.
Well-
We've got to enforce our borders. We've got to deal with the 12 million here. I think it's not inappropriate to
how?
say we got to find a way to normalize them.
All right.
And I don't think it's inappropriate to say the ones who have here and abused our hospitality by committing crimes, you're going back. That's
All right.
just common sense.
And we're going to have to see how all these details shake out in week 2. Stay tuned.